So good afternoon. Welcome to everyone to our NREM research seminar. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're very, very lucky to have Miles Thomas here speaking about ferns, something he knows a little bit about, you know. But before we get started with the seminar, we'd like to welcome Miles and welcome ourselves to this space by starting with NREM. So, you know what, please join us. If not, please enjoy the spirit of this.
He aloha no ka aina uluwehi. He aloha no ka aina uluwehi. Vehi ke aloha na kupuna e. E kuna vai ke kau I ka hano. Hano hano vale o manoa e. E ho mai ka mao pono. Pono mai uka I ka ie. Aloha e. Aloha e. Aloha e.
Mahalo o kau no ke la e himeni no mahalo no no koukou kipa mai ana nei ke ia hoi ke a kuia o kou ka imi na hoa o ke ia mahu palapalai ma. So thank you guys for coming. Jerry. Oh, my alien.
I know. Hi everyone. So I have the privilege today to introduce our speaker, Miles Thomas. Miles is from the Maunalua area of Oahu and has been studying Hawaiian plants for 15 years and has been working as a conservationist for the past 6 years. He received both his BS and MS in botany from UH Manoa and currently works as a research specialist in the botany department at the Bernice Pauaki Bishop Museum, as a part-time field technician with the Plant Extinction Prevention Program, and as a consultant for Protect and Preserve Hawaii. As a researcher, he focuses on taxonomy and conservation of the native Hawaiian flora. So without further ado, Miles Thomas.
Hello everybody. Hi, thank you guys for having me here. Right now, so there's a lot of stuff I could talk about. So I kind of narrowed it down to this presentation. It's just good fun just talking story about ferns, and a lot of times you'll see a species and then you're like, okay, it has a name, and then you go in the store and like, that's the same name. I'm gonna go buy it and plant it. Then you realize, bro, I think kind of different, yeah. So, so yeah. How I came at what started my research or to do this presentation, I used to be a horticulturist at the Line Arboretum when I was doing grad school, and I had really, I had really intimate interactions with these ferns, and I'd be like, this Palapalai I got from Wailupe looks different from the other ones in the garden. Kupukupu looks different, and this ʻЭkaha looked different. So I went down a really long rabbit hole, and some papers were published, and my head hurt a little bit, but that's how it is. So let's dive in. Okay, the first one. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about ʻEkaha, Palapalai, and Kupukupu. So ʻEkaha, most people call them bird's nest ferns. Why is that? Because they look like a bird's nest, I guess. Now, the original description of bird's nest ferns, Linnaeus, everybody here I assume knows who Carl Linnaeus is. If not, a lot of people kind of give him the title father of the modern taxonomy with his binomial naming system. Plenty of other people actually had their naming systems before Linnaeus at the same time, but he gets the most credit. But anyways, one of his first descriptions is like plant in a tree in which birds nest in. So that's from his Species Plantarum, like the 1700s. You don't need to know that. But all you need to know is that we have a native one, and then we have two non-native ones. And this one was the first fern. I was like, bro, what the heck is going on? Okay. So yeah, the native one is this Asplenium misifolium, Splenitis, and Asplenium australisicum is a horticultural one. But yeah, the other main point is that because all the species within this group of Asplenium, there used to be its own genus, Thamnopterus. They all look kind of the same, except there's, when you look at the midrib detail, the black line in the middle of the frond, you kind of get to understand, and then the scales in the basket, you'll understand the differences quite readily, especially if you look at them under a scope and so on and so forth. Okay, so look how different. So this is one species. This is ʻЭkaha. That's Asplenium nidus. At one time, our ʻEkaha were lumped into Asplenium nidus. These are kind of a lot of bit different. See how that's different? Very different. So yeah, I was at Line Arboretum cutting fronds, like, this is a dead frond, cut it away. Wow, the midrib looks different. Oh, compare it. And then just kind of banging my head against the wall, trying to read books. Not a lot of current literature on them. People will do genetics and all kinds of stuff and be like, sometimes they're taking genetic samples or tissue samples of all kind Kupukupu, like mixed match ferns and putting them into phylogenies to get all this crazy not clear delineations between species. But once you start to really look at the ferns, you'll be like, okay, get them. So yeah. So yeah. So true Asplenium nidus is that one, and this is the native one. So I'm gonna tell you a story how this name came about, obviously. So okay, so a long time ago, there's so in the most fern treatments, there's like you ever get a book called Hawaiian Ferns and Fern Allies, that like, so way before that, like in the 1800s, maybe like late 1700s, Asplenium nidus was the catch-all for all bird's nest ferns. And then as people started going throughout different parts of the world, some people were naming different species, some people weren't, but because that's way before the time of, you get your cell phone, you get your internet, people had to write papers and then put them in a journal. Not everybody had access to these journals because they're in vastly different countries. So people are just kind of accepting other people's word. That's like, Hawaii gets Asplenium nidus. And then somewhere along the line, there's a guy named, what's it called? Richard Holton wrote a big monograph, and he actually in the 70s, he said, okay, here's all these different species that he looked at. So that monograph, Holton's monograph, is what I use to look at our plants here. So at one time, again, these were both Asplenium nidus, and then I used his monograph and I actually came across this name, and the description for this species in his monograph said that it matched our plants pretty perfectly. And basically, I wrote a bunch of papers and stuff, got submitted to journals, and then it all culminated into one paper that showed that yeah, our plants should be called Asplenium muscifolium. So yeah, when you buy stuff in horticulture, typically you're getting Asplenium nidus, but if you go in the forest, this is the native one. Okay, so yeah, major differences is that muscifolium, see this bottom bulge right here? And then this is the basal part of the fern. This is the distal part. That's typically muscifolium. So the original description for muscifolium is like carinated with a blunt ridge on the bottom. Carinated means just has a ridge. But yeah, this blunt ridge right here. Look at that. And then the cortex of muscifolium. So like if you look at from elsewhere in the this is like in Borneo. That's the same kind of muscifolium shape right there. And then nidus is on the right. So when you're walking around forests, unfortunately, nidus is prevalent because it's been introduced in Hawaii since like the 1960s. So you'll see both, but through all the herbarium records that I've looked at, through all the descriptions and stuff, it's pretty clear that Asplenium nidus is not native to the Hawaiian Islands. Yeah, muscifolium is the native one. But, oh yeah, and then also when you look at scales, so these scales on the Asplenium muscifolium, I think it's the ʻEkaha, have this really dark melanic cell walls to them. And then you have kind of twice the cell length of the nidus. So you don't even need a dissecting scope or a compound scope to look at this. You can just use a hand lens. You can see it pretty clearly. Also, I noticed that if you see right here, there's these recurved scale, recurved margins of the scale. So, and kind of backtracking, when you look at the basket of, so the bird says ferns like big, they call it a shuttlecock shape, but it's, you know, big basket. These scales are like in the middle, tending to the young fronds as they unfurl. So yeah, you gotta go kind of dig in there. Careful, because there's always a centipede or two kind of hanging out in there. But yeah, they have the nidus has these recurved margins, so like hook margins, where our ʻekaha do not have that recurved margin. Yeah, so you can see the scales were pretty different. One thing I did notice though, that should have put a picture in here, is that I looked at Asplenium muscifolium from Borneo and from New Guinea, and their scales actually look more similar to nidus here. That may indicate that our ʻekaha might be an endemic species, but that's ongoing research because I'm working with people from Malaysia to give me specimens so I can look at if there's any of that variation outside of Hawaii. But for now, I didn't want to jump the gun and be like native species or endemic species, but keeping it in Asplenium muscifolium for now because that's the best taxonomic thing. That's the safest thing to do. Okay, so yeah, these are from Malaysia, so I'm showing similarities. And then this is a really old specimen. So I wasn't the only person who thought Musifolia was a name that to be applied. You can see Neotopterus musifolia, that's just a synonym for Asplenium musifolium. So for those who are not super familiar with taxonomy, you have like everybody knows what a synonym, I guess, is like a word that is like the same thing as another word. So there's a bunch of names over the years, different genera change, different families change sometimes, but there's a history of names that are applied to the same species concept, but just the name changes. So at one point, this bird was in its genus Neotopterus musifolia is a species. So now it's Asplenium musifolium. But you can see as on this herbarium sheet, you have the original label. So this is from probably the 1850s, because it was from Wilhelm Hillebrand's collection. He died in the late 1800s. But yeah, so I went from that musifolia to Asplenium nidus, and then I slapped on a label, didn't put in this because we don't have the high res photo, but there's a new label that says Asplenium musifolium, and it'd be like determined by yours truly. Yeah.
Where is this?
Oh yeah, Fishing Museum. Sorry, good point. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with what a herbarium is, who here has been to a herbarium before? Okay, for those who have not, herbariums are like any other natural history collection, a library of sorts of bunch of plant data. A lot of our data is stored like this in dried specimens. Sometimes we have wet specimens steeped in ethanol. Sometimes you have oversized stuff, like you can't really press a coconut flat, so you put it in a bag. But we have over 600,000 specimens. That number is always changing because we're always getting new specimens every day. And they're all usually stored like this. So they're stored by larger division of the group. So this would be in the fern section. And then it would be the family Aspleniaceae because it's in the spleen words. And then you have the genus Asplenium. And within that cabinet, there's the different species. And then it's by island. And then after that, not much other finer dissection. But yeah, in a nutshell. Okay. So even on a dried specimen, some people will ask me, how can you tell the shape of the midrib on a dried specimen? That bugger is flat. Like, not really. Check it out. You can see where they cut it. There's the blunt ridge right there. This frond is obviously facing upside down because it's been bent back. And then you can see the ridge right here as well. So you can once you kind of see them over and over again, you'll get to be able to like kind of look from the side, use a microscope. If the herbarium manager or collection manager is super happy that day, she'll let you cut a piece of the specimen off. We try not to do that because any tampering of the specimen could really take away from its usability by other researchers if done wrong, but I'm a very careful person, I promise. Yeah. Oh, and then there's the habit of so this ʻekaha fern will grow on boulders, on trees and stuff. Some cultural uses of this fern was that, oh yeah, this is some summarizing stuff for here. But the cultural uses of this fern was a lot of times people would take the midrib and use it as plating or a process called ulana. So if you ever hear people ulana hala, that means they're plating hala. Ulana niu, ulana lolu. People, Hawaiian artisans back then, around the time of European people coming here, showing them how to make hats, they're like, check this out. My papali is better than your papali. Yeah. Cherry. Okay, and recapping on nidus, flat on the bottom, bulging on the top. Not a native species. It's getting planted in some areas, not super fun, but yeah, I've had to have talks with some people before. So incipient, meaning that it's spreading, it's not ubiquitous, it's not like strawberry guava where it's just freaking wreaking havoc everywhere. But there are gulches mostly on the windward side of this island, back of this valley, and in various spots around Maui, Hawaii Island or Kauai, I've seen it. But yeah, it's been here since the 1960s at least. So there she goes. So careful if you buy one. You're like, how's this ʻekaha I got from Home Depot? No, don't do that. Don't plant it. Okay, there's another one that gets sold as Asplenium nidus, and I seen it at the international marketplace recently. Yeah, the sign says Asplenium nidus ʻekaha. I'm like, well, that's Asplenium australisicum. So it's got a see the bottom bulge bump thing. It's really sharp. It's like a pizza wedge. Make me hungry, but yeah. So definitely not nidus. Definitely not that. Look how that and that are different. Jeez. But yeah, co-op farmers, Home Depot. Sometimes I'll have friends that'll be like, they'll go buy stuff like, wow, how's this ʻekaha? I'm like, not ʻekaha. Shit. Yeah, so, but yeah, triangular cross section from Australia through the South Pacific, Samoa, Vanuatu, Fiji, Nukuhiva, Hiva-Oa, like in the Marquesas, Society Islands, or the Tahiti, Raiatea, all the way to, I think, like Ponape, sort of put down there a lot, but yeah. The scourges of horticultural industry, mislabeling plants. Okay. And then, oh yeah, so on a herbarium specimen that I collected, where was that? Oh yeah, from International Marketplace. Yeah, I had permission, I promise. I didn't just like pop flip her off, but yeah, so see that sharp ridge on the bottom, even a dried specimen, it's really clear there. So what I'm talking about mostly right here, just like my job every day is like look at plants, learn the differences, put names, and help articulate information to people. So this is a theme that's going to be going on throughout this whole presentation. Okay, recap. Driving it home into your brain. Nidus, australisicum, and our native ʻekaha musciform, which might be an endemic species, pending further investigation. Okay, and I made one small kind key to help you guys out, help people out. Don't focus on this. If you really want to know your hoi hoi for this information, email me and I will give you a whole paper that talks about all this stuff. Okay, next one.
Miles.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, with the two non-native birds.
Yeah.
Are they considered invasive, or are they?
Well, nidus I consider incipient, like it's not fully, it's, I guess technically an invasive species is something that's displacing any native species, but there's a whole spectrum of like what you can call naturalized to invasive to whatever. My opinion, where Asplenium nidus does grow prolifically, it is invasive because yeah, it makes babies everywhere. Like it's nobody's business. The ʻekaha don't make as much babies. They're not as fecund as these guys, but yeah, and haven't seen australisicum in the wild yet. But nidus is definitely becoming a problem,
I see.
especially since I've been seeing people plant it in all kinds of spots up Malka, and you're like,
And they think it's ʻekaha.
yeah, because they bought it, because like that book in 2003 said nidus is native, and I'm like, well, that's the problem. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any more questions? Question?
So was nidus intentionally introduced by horticulturists as well, or not sure? or-
Oh, they import whatever they like to import. So they're just like, look at this pretty fern. And then it just happens that people who want to plant native stuff, they're like, they look at old checklists, and that was me. I was like, bro, nidus, sick, this nidus grows really fast. And then, yeah, that was the other red flag is the Asplenium nidus grows way faster and is less of a scrub than our ʻekaha in many ways, because it can grow in all kinds of ecosystems and yeah, just really prolific. That was another red flag. You're just like, this thing grows way too fast. Uh-oh. Yeah. But yeah, intentionally brought because horticulturalists like make pretty everywhere. Yeah. And this is a theme with even the next one. So Nephrolepis. Okay, so this is another thing. This is actually on a grow bench, grow table at Lion, the picture on the right. This one on the left, that was my knee popping by the way. This is a native kupukupu growing in the wet forest of Eliao, which is in like above Mauna and like Waimano. So you can see in that photo on the where my hand's touching, there's that fern, and then the one on the right is the horticultural one. And I was looking at them like, gee, these look a little different, but it's nuanced, so hence the nuanced Nephrolepis. And I was growing them, and I was like in the same substrate, in the same greenhouse. People call that a common garden experiment. You're giving them all the same stuff, but their genetics are like acting upon it and showing a different phenotypes. That could also be part of like, population differences within the species. So there's a lot of variables and caveats when you're doing common garden experiments. But when you do a lot of replicates, obviously you're bringing up that statistic probability that these things might be different. Check it out. Okay, so I'm gonna explain the native versus the hort variety. So and then I'll talk about another one called ni'ani'au, and then there's super invasive one that's all over campus and everywhere, from way up in the Big Island, up in the volcano area, down to the ocean. Nephrolepis brownii, because this one often gets sold as kupukupu on Craigslist. Yeah, people are like, it popped up in my yard, like weird. Okay, so when you look at the native portfolio, you see this rachis. So when you have a fern that has a stem, before it gets into the leafy portion, it's called the stipe. The stipe and petiole are the same stuff. But once it enters the leafy part, it becomes the rachis. Check out that rachis with all the scales. You look at these small side to side lobes of the frond are typically called pinna. So the base of the pinna in this case is the most important thing to identifying this type of Nephrolepis. One thing that unites all cordifolia together though is the appearance of tubers on the roots. So if you imagine my arm is a root, my hand is a tuber, it's like this ball thing for carbohydrate storage. When the fern dies back, can derive energy. So they all have that. But Nephrolepis cordifolia in itself is a taxonomic dumping ground of all kinds of variation within the world. There's a bunch of synonyms within Nephrolepis cordifolia that people don't recognize anymore because the genetics is all weird. And then a lot of the studies show that the variation you can't easily parse out specimens when you're in a herbarium, but that just requires a lot of study. Ferns are crazy. They often hybridize, sometimes across genera. So have like intergeneric hybrids. They make nothogenera, and then species hybridize all the time. But for our purposes, there are definitely native populations of Nephrolepis cordifolia, and then stuff that's imported, and imported since probably the early 1900s. Anyways, going back to morphology, I drew that picture on the right. So the one on the bottom is this thing. See how it's flat? You can see the rachis. It's like someone took a scissor and went just like that. That's typically what you'll see with the pinna. There's also like typical like a gestalt to it. Like in this photo, it looks a little bit more wiggly. scientific word, wiggly. And then the lobes are a bit more blunt, and then they scallop that way. They kind of do a little bend to them. And then the non-native one, the pinna are more they're more close together, and they're kind of just more straight. They can be kind of bendy a little bit, but I found out that if you just look at the base of the pinna, then that's more or less what's called a salient feature. Salient meaning that it's a standalone feature. You don't need to look at anything else. You look at that, then you're pretty guaranteed to get the right identification. So, and as says botanists and taxonomists, we're always looking for these salient features because I don't want to spend time like dissecting stuff. And the less I got to work, the more fun it is. So, but yeah, flat base of the pinna versus it's got this booty bump of butt cheek, 100%. Oh yeah, there's a drawing that I did make them more guarantees. This is the native one. Look at it grow. Wow, beautiful. This is they usually grow in cloudy forests, wetter forests, or mesic forests that have a lot of cloud movement. So this one is the Ko'olau summit above Wailupe. That bugga is up in Koke'e in the middle, and on the right is from somewhere deep in a Kipukupu volcano, or off Saddle Road actually, between Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea on Hawaii Island. I'm always taking photos of ferns, and my friend's like, "Bro, hurry up!" Like, hey, try wait. Hey, y'all noticed that? Sorry, I'm making myself people. See how it's like scallops? Herbarium specimens do a lot of work for you. They do a lot of wonders. Like, look at that. They all cut. They don't have that booty bump. They do that little swoosh. A lot of times the sterile part. So this one, no more the sexy bits. This one, the sterile part, is kind of always broad and not toothed versus the fertile bits with the sexy parts. Those ones definitely have more bumps to them, and the margin, the edge of the pinna is usually like crenate or dentate, serrate, however you want to call that, but kind of different. So a little bit of dimorphism, but yeah, so you can see how remote, so not overlapping. The pinna are kind of distant. They don't like touch each other, so. And then look at this broader right here, kind of overlapping, booty bump right there, obscuring the rachis. There again, so you guys get the picture. This one is planted, unfortunately, in a lot of restoration areas because it grows really fast and spores get around, but people, like I went to a restoration area on Hawaii Island, and then this guy really wanted to make his yard really nice. He's like building a forest reserve, and he planted hundreds of this thing, and now it's like forming a monoculture on the ground. And I had to break it to him. I was like the bearer of bad news. I felt bad because the guy was like, I'm doing great. I'm like, oh, crap, uncle, gotta rip it out. But I don't know, it may serve some purpose for holding water or doing some kind of ground cover. But if you're trying to plant something native, unfortunately, that is not it. And it's, again, this is the result of when you have a common scientific name that a lot of things are put into that bin. It's easy if you're not familiar with these nuances to be like, bro, plant native versus not native. Crazy. Yeah, herbarium specimen. Okay, so long time ago, this booty bump thing was called Nephrolepis auriculata. Auricles are like, have lobes like your ear, so there's a mushroom called Pepeo, auriculella cornea. That's the auricle part is like the lobe, like your ear. Same word, Pepeo actually means ear, but yeah. Okay, Nephrolepis exaltata. This one gets misidentified for Nephrolepis cordifolia a lot. A lot of people, when they go look at Nephrolepis in the wild, they'll be like, oh, bro, look at all these cordifolia. And then it's actually a different species, totally different species than that. The Hawaiian name, Ni'ani'au, is the name I usually use for it because that's the name that is recorded in a lot of books and a lot of like old newspapers from the 1800s. They call it Ni'ani'au. Unless you're on Ni'ihau and they refer to it as Palapalai. A little confusing. Truncated at the base means that, so if you look at these Nephrolepis hortifolia, see how there's like a gradual taper to the bottom, like it gets, these pinna get smaller and smaller, but gradually, not abruptly, gradually. That guy does not do that. See at the bottom, exhibit A. It like just ends, at big pinna, so. Also, the pinna are usually broader and they're more thick, leathery. But you can see even in that specimen right there, you have like two different types, so. A lot of times this one will look like cordifolia because the pinna are more narrow. But again, like you just gotta look at the whole plant at the bottom. And then it'll get you there. And these do not have any tubers when you, fortunately, you have to kind of pull it up, but. Yeah, it was treated as an endemic subspecies for a long time, but until last year or the year before that, 2023, time flies. That endemic subspecies was found to be just part of its natural range of variation. And us people at the museum was like, okay, never mind, it's just Nephrolepis exaltata, but it's native. This thing also typically grows in a lot drier ecosystems, so when you guys went to protect and preserve Hawaii, there's like a lot of those gulches actually have this. There's like pretty dry forest. Then it goes all the way up to music wet forest. But this thing tends to hybridize with the next species I'm going to talk about. So yeah, that's another presentation in itself. I won't go too in depth about that. But naughty Nephrolepis. Okay, this is Nephrolepis brownii. This is one that you'll see growing out of AC units, sometimes old cars in like Kalu'u, like the radiator, and then growing in cracks and growing all over the wet forests, on trees as an epiphyte, in lava flows on the Big Island. One of the things that I usually look for is, well, there's several things. So first, I'll take a pinna, this is the upper surface, I'll bend it over. There's this mohawk of like really fine white hairs along the costa, or the middle axis of the pinna. If it has that, that's brownii. Good job, you did it. On the fertile parts, they have these really big like thumbs up. Actually, thumbs down because it's invasive. But yeah, it's got these really pronounced auricles at these like really long pinna bases. And then they have these armpit hairs always, especially towards the distal part or the tip of the frond. And then the young fronds coming out, they're usually covered in this gray, scurfy layer of hair and scales. Yeah, but mainly if you see it, sometimes the hybrid will look like that, except you'll look at the pinna and then you'll see this like fine mohawk of hair there. Yeah. Okay, and then a crazy key as well, but this is like what the Fern manual will have in it, and or other manuals that have these dichotomous keys. So if you're kind of interested, I can just run through really quick. You go with, it's like a system of couplets. So the first couplet is like, is my plant, does it have pinna narrowly undulating at margin, narrow undulating at margin with the thumb-like auricle at the base of the pinna and the costa with the rows of hairs? Like that. That's brownii. And then if it doesn't match any of these descriptions, then you go to the next one, and then you go to the second couplet. So in couplet 2 from couplet 1, and then you go through it again, you start reading and comparing, and then you're like, it's like a series of choices. Life is about choices. Okay, cool. Palapalai, but not the ni'ihau palapalai, because this one no more on ni'ihau. Microlepia setosa. Okay, so this one used to be called Microlepia strigosa. So a lot of even current websites that you'll read for Palapalai, they'll have this name, Microlepia strigosa. So Microlepia strigosa is obviously different than the Hawaiian plants. Hawaiian plants, indigenous, so this is a species that's found, setosa is found all like in Hawaii and parts of India and parts of Southeast Asia. Not really on any of the Pacific Islands that I've seen through the herbarium record, but spores get around, go in the jet stream, they fly. biogeography is a weird thing. Let's do a grad project on it. Just kidding. But yeah, you'll see that it's indigenous, so they obviously look pretty different. Then there's a paper I can email you guys. I should have had the URL down there. My bad. But there's all this studying that I did to look at it. But if you want to look at Palapalai, that's what it looks like. Then we're gonna get into it now. Okay, so Palapalai are typically 2 pinnate pinnatisect to 3 times compound. People are always asking, you're probably asking yourself, WTF, like what does that mean? Means that you have, so this is once compound, twice, 3 times. So long story short, really dissected, little looking lacy and stuff. Also the fronds are always broadest, the pinna are always broadest at the base. So it's like this triangle that goes boom, boom. Did it. So thrice compound almost, and then got the broad base to it. This next one is what is planted in a lot of gardens, including the one that's by Scheidler and all over town. And it's mostly twice compound. And then if you notice at the base of this frond, use this pin again. See how these lateral pinna reduce in size as you get to the base of the plant? Yeah, different. A lot of affinity to Asian populations like Japan, China, Taiwan, all through there, and then parts of Polynesia. But yeah, long time introduction. I've seen specimens that come from the actually not as early as ʻEkaha, but mostly from the 1970s and on. But the other thing too is that a lot of people, if you talk to people who are in hula halau and they make lei, they're like, this thing is pretty junk versus this thing is the better one. They makes more full lei. So that's the other way that I found it out, is because I was helping friends make lei and like, don't pick the one in the museum. That one's pretty doo-doo. This one is the better one. Go into your areas that you know that have choke Palapalai, and then when we get that one, make big, lei po'o, lei upe'e, lei a'i, basically head, wrist, ankles, and neck lei. But yeah, that's that thing. Oh, and then there's a kind of a glossy sheen to this one. These ones are a bit more matte. So not as glossy. But yeah, main thing is the dissection. Oh yeah, and there's the non-native one at the Scheidler Garden. So sometimes it can be a little bit more dissected looking, but oh yeah, and then the pinna, this whole pinna is usually really narrow and whip-like. But again, it's like reducing at the base there. And there's some ones there's like Taiwan and Ryukyu populations that look just like the horticultural stuff there. Okay, Peter Macrolepia, same stuff. And then, wait, questions?